Kabbalists arrived in Sephardic, a small Galilee town that had become a center of Kabbalistic studies since the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, the year Columbus set sail. Moses Cordovero, a famous teacher, had just completed a systematic summary of the medieval Kabbalah, which reached its climax in Spain with the publication of the Zohar at the end of the 13th century, in his work Pardes Rimonim, Orchard of the Pomegranates. The young Kabbalist was called Isaac Luria, or in Hebrew, Yitzhak ben Shlomo Luria Ashkenazi, and he further developed the Kabbalistic thought in his brief 2-year ministry in Safed in such a profound way that he still bears the honorable name Ha-Ari HaKadosh, the Holy Lion. Isaac Luria was born in 1534 in Jerusalem. His father's family came from Germany or Poland, while his mother belonged to Sephardic Judaism. After the early death of his father, his family found refuge in Cairo, where an uncle enabled him to study the Talmud amongst the best teachers of his time. Luria married a cousin at the age of 15, which was not uncommon in that time. When he discovered the Zohar at the age of 22, his life took a dramatic turn. He secluded himself for many years to a deserted Nile island to devote himself to the study of this extensive compendium of the Kabbalah. Admittedly, he visited his family every Shabbat, but he rarely spoke, and if speaking was unavoidable, he spoke only in Hebrew, the holy language. The common language at that time was Aramaic. It is said that in those years he had contact with angels, long ago deceased great Kabbalists, and even the prophet Elijah himself, who had finally requested him to study with Rabbi Moses Cordovero, the most important teacher in Safed. The studies took only a few months because Cordovero died in June of the same year. Thanks to his competence and charisma, Luria was immediately recognized as the new head of the Kabbalist community. This was followed by intensive teachings in the inner circle of his students. Luria himself wrote hardly anything. We only know about his teachings thanks to the written compilations of his master student, Chaim Vital, who himself was a recognized Kabbalist. At first, Chaim Vital was critical of Luria, but eventually became his most faithful follower. The deep impression that Luria must have made on his surroundings becomes clear from the following statements by Chaim Vital. In addition to a comprehensive religious knowledge, Luria understood the language of trees, birds, and even angels. He could not only read the past and future and the thoughts of another person by merely looking at their face, but also recognize their former lives. He was able to see the future and had the gift of what we call today remote viewing. It is remarkable that in just 2 years of working in Safed and until his death, Luria left an impressive legacy. His main work, Etz Chaim, the Tree of Life, edited by Chaim Vital, comprises 8 volumes in total. It remained as a manuscript for a long time and was only published in Europe in 1772. The Kabbalistic teachings of Luria are highly complex and can only be presented in form of a few notes in this short video. While medieval Kabbalah until Cordovero developed a rather static image of the divine creative process, Luria examined its dynamic side, so to speak. For example, he wondered, how could an imperfect, polar, time and space-bound creation with, for example, evilness, emerge from an all-encompassing perfect divinity that is beyond all human understanding and conceptual categories? The Gnostic schools in Alexandria had already dealt with this question and had come to the conclusion that the material creation can only be the work of a bumbling demiurge, a subordinate, stubborn god, and many Gnostics identified this demiurge with the God of the so-called Old Testament. In their opinion, it would therefore be important to escape this failed creation, this prison for the soul, as quickly as possible in order to find back the true Creator God, who had never wanted material creation in the first place. Luria did not deny the imperfections of this world that we live in, but he realized that it was part of a grand scheme of an incredibly magnificent and all-good divinity. Ein Sof, this divine being which is beyond all comprehension for us humans, and which is at the same time non-being, initiated the process of creation in the act of tzimtzum, which means contraction, withdrawal. an act of self-limitation that makes creation possible in the first place. In this metaphysical vacuum, Adam Kadmon, the archetype of all creation and of man, developed, from which developed different worlds with the Etz Chaim, the tree of life with the 10 Sephirot and the 22 holy letters, which, so to speak, become the building blocks of creation. Luria taught that some of the Sephirot could not contain the incoming divine light, and broke. In Hebrew, this is called Shvirat HaKelem, the breaking of the vessels. The fragments, the klipat, for example, the shards or shells that still contain divine spark of light, fell into darkness, where they became the Sitra Achra, the other side opposed to divine holiness. It is now the task of every human being and humanity as a whole to work on the wholeness and re-healing of creation. This Tikkun HaOlam, the repair of the world, is to redeem step by step all the divine sparks of light within the klipat, both in ourselves and in the world. Every action of a person leads either to the redemption or to the strengthening of darkness. For Luria, it was clear that this process would drag on for many lives, which is why he took the concept of reincarnation, Gilgul, for granted. In life, every person encounters exactly the circumstances and people who help him or her to work on the redemption of the sparks of light by turning darkness into light and so gradually converting the darkness, if it is his or her will. For God, in his all-encompassing love, has gifted man with freedom of choice. In contrast to Gnosis, Luria believed that life is not about escaping from material creation, but about turning this world step by step into a sacred place. Luria went even further. By working on redemption of creation through wise and compassionate action, we become God's true partners in the creative process. We even help the deity itself to become more complete, because through us, God can experience himself anew in this working process. What a revolutionary view of the relationship between God and man. But Luria's insights into the dialectical creation process, coincidentia oppositorum, also had a profound impact on the development of Kant's philosophy, via Schelling to Hegel, and not least on psychoanalysis, especially the work of Carl Gustav Jung. When Jung speaks of dealing with the shadow and the task of each person to develop his own divine self through individuation, he simply expresses Lurian's insight in a more modern terminology. The fact that Jung knew and appreciated Luria's work becomes clear from a letter in which he writes, "In a tract of the Lurianic Kabbalah, the remarkable idea is developed that man is destined to become God's helper in the attempt to restore the vessels which were broken when God thought to create a world. Only a few weeks ago, I came across this impressive doctrine which gives meaning to man's status exalted by the incarnation." Letter dated from February 17, 1954, to Reverend Erastus Evans. If you visit Safed on the trails of Luria today, you will find the Ha-Ari Ashkenazi synagogue, built shortly after his death. Even Isaac Luria himself